Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story, everyone. The small town of Willowbrook, Virginia, had the kind of charm that made people believe in fairy tales, tree-lined streets, houses with welcoming porches, and that slow pace that allowed children to grow up without rushing. It was there that Ethan Brooks and Stella Morgan first met at 6 years old, when she moved into the house next door with her newly divorced mother. Ethan still remembered the first day he saw her. Stella was sitting on the porch swing, her brown hair tousled by the wind, wearing a yellow dress that seemed too big for her small frame. She was looking out at the street with a serious, almost melancholy expression, as if she carried secrets too heavy for a girl her age. "Are you the new girl?" Ethan had asked, walking up to the fence that divided their backyards. Stella looked at him with those green eyes that seemed to hold mysteries. "I'm Stella. And you're the loud boy who's always running around in the yard." From that moment on, they became inseparable. Ethan discovered that Stella wasn't just the quiet girl who watched the world from afar. She was curious, brave, and had an infectious laugh that could make any day seem brighter. Together, they explored every corner of Willowbrook, as if they were adventurers discovering a lost continent. During summers, they built forts in the forest behind their houses, using branches, leaves, and all the creativity two young minds could muster. Stella always insisted on making the most elaborate plans, drawing imaginary maps and creating stories about hidden treasures. Ethan, in turn, was the one who put everything into practice, climbing the tallest trees to hang ropes or digging holes when Stella decided they needed a secret passage. "Ethan, do you think we'll be friends forever?" Stella had asked one afternoon, while they were lying in the grass, watching clouds slowly drift across the blue sky. "Of course we will," Ethan replied without hesitation, turning to look at her. "We're a team, Stella, like Batman and Robin." "Then I'm Batman," she said with a mischievous smile. "Okay, you can be Batman." As they grew older, this bond only deepened. During the storms that frequently hit Virginia, Stella always ran to Ethan's house. She was afraid of thunder, but never admitted it out loud. Instead, she made up excuses. She wanted to watch a movie, or the power had gone out at her house, or she was simply bored. Ethan never questioned it. He simply opened the door, grabbed extra blankets, and made popcorn. They would settle into his bed, Stella always curling up a little closer when the sound of rain grew more intense. Ethan pretended not to notice how she grabbed his shirt sleeve during the loudest thunder, or how her breathing calmed when he started talking about anything to distract her. "Aren't you afraid of anything, Ethan?" Stella asked one night during a particularly strong storm. They were 12 years old, and Ethan was beginning to realize that Stella was no longer the little girl he had first met. "I'm afraid of some things," he admitted quietly, listening to the wind shake the trees outside. "I'm afraid you'll move far away. I'm afraid we'll grow up and become different people." Stella turned to him, resting her head on her hand. In the dim light of the room, illuminated only by occasional lightning, Ethan thought she looked different. Older? Maybe prettier? "Definitely. I'll never move away," she promised. "And even if we grow up, we'll still be us, Ethan. Some things never change." They had a habit of falling asleep like this, talking softly until sleep overtook them. Ethan always woke up first, watching Stella sleep beside him. Her hair spread across the pillow, one hand always finding a way to touch his arm during the night. It was comforting and natural, like breathing. During their teenage years, when other friends started making jokes about them sleeping in the same bed, Ethan and Stella would just look at each other and shrug. They knew what they had, and they didn't need to explain it to anyone. It was a pure friendship without complications, built on years of absolute trust. On camping nights with the Scouts, Stella always ended up in Ethan's tent, claiming the other girls snored or that she was cold. During church retreats, they found a way to stay in the same room. At sleepovers, Stella made sure her sleeping bag was next to Ethan's. "You two are attached at the hip," Stella's mother used to joke, but always with a loving smile. "It's good to see such a true friendship." And it was true. They shared everything. Dreams about the future, fears about the present, secrets no one else knew. Ethan knew about the star-shaped birthmark Stella had on her left shoulder. Stella knew that Ethan still slept with a teddy bear hidden under his pillow. They knew the sounds of each other's breathing, knew when the other was really sleeping or just pretending. But there were moments, small, fleeting ones, when something different lingered in the air between them. When Stella laughed at a joke Ethan told, and her eyes lingered on his face for a few seconds too long. When Ethan helped Stella reach something on a high shelf, and the closeness made his heart race in a way he couldn't explain. When they watched romantic movies and glanced at each other during kissing scenes, both quickly looking away, as if they'd been caught doing something wrong. These moments were like sparks, quick, intense, and immediately forgotten, or at least they pretended to forget. As they approached 18, Ethan began to notice things he had never noticed before. How Stella's lips were naturally pink, even without lipstick. How she always smelled like vanilla and something floral he couldn't identify. How her body had changed, gaining gentle curves that made Ethan feel confused and guilty at the same time. But Stella was his best friend, his confidant, his adventure companion, the person who knew all his secrets. She was safety, comfort, home, and Ethan had learned that some things were too sacred to risk. On graduation night, when Stella appeared in her navy blue dress, her hair pulled back in an elegant bun that left her neck exposed, Ethan felt something stir in his chest, something warm and unsettling that he quickly pushed to the back of his mind. "You look beautiful," he said, and his voice came out a little rougher than he intended. "Thank you," Stella replied, and for the first time in years, she seemed shy beside him. That night, after the party, they lay in Ethan's bed, as they had done thousands of times before, but something was different. The silence seemed denser, loaded with unspoken things. When Stella turned to him, whispering, "Good night," Ethan felt a strange urge to touch her face, to discover if her skin was as soft as it looked. Instead, he simply replied, "Good night," and closed his eyes, pretending that strange feeling in his stomach was just nervousness about college starting in a few months. After all, they were just friends, always had been, always would be. There was nothing different about it, or was there? 5 years after graduation, Willowbrook remained the kind of place where everyone knew each other by first name, where gossip traveled faster than the wind, and where young adults often returned after discovering that the world out there wasn't as welcoming as they had imagined. Ethan and Stella did exactly that. Ethan had tried life in Richmond, working at a digital marketing company, but the hustle and bustle of the big city never managed to fill the emptiness he felt. Stella spent 2 years at a college in North Carolina studying literature, but came back when her mother was diagnosed with diabetes and needed help managing the family's small bookstore. It was as if fate had conspired to keep them together. "I knew you'd come back," Stella said the day Ethan showed up at her bookstore, carrying a box with his things and a somewhat sheepish smile. "How did you know?" he asked, leaning on the counter where Stella was organizing new releases. "Because you belong here, Ethan, just like I do." She looked at him with those green eyes that seemed to see through any facade. "The big city doesn't suit you." Ethan laughed, running his hand through his hair, which he now wore a little longer. "My mom must have told you I was miserable there. Your mom didn't need to tell me anything. I knew, and she really did know." Stella could always read Ethan like an open book, an ability that had become even sharper over the years. She could tell when he was stressed by the way he played with his hair, knew when he was sad because he became quieter than usual, and could predict his jokes before he even told them. Quickly, they fell back into their familiar routine. Ethan got a job at the local insurance agency, work that paid the bills, but didn't demand much of his time or energy. This meant he could spend afternoons helping Stella at the bookstore, reorganizing shelves, chatting with regular customers, and simply enjoying her company. "You don't have to stay here every afternoon," Stella said one Thursday, as they were closing the store. "Are you sure you don't have anything better to do?" Ethan locked the door and handed her the keys. "Like what? Watching TV alone? Eating frozen food? At least here I have interesting company." "Interesting?" Stella raised an eyebrow, a playful smile dancing on her lips. "I spent the entire afternoon organizing cookbooks alphabetically. I'm not sure that qualifies as interesting." "It does for me." There was something about the way he said it, low, sincere, that made Stella look at him more carefully. For a moment, silence stretched between them, loaded with something neither could name. Family dinners became a tradition. Every Sunday, Stella and her mother went to Ethan's parents' house, where Mrs. Brooks prepared her famous lasagna, and Mr. Brooks told the same stories about his youth. Ethan and Stella always sat next to each other, as they had since childhood, sharing dishes and whispering funny comments about stories they'd heard dozens of times. "You two are still like 2 peas in a pod, Mrs. Brooks commented one Sunday, watching how Stella automatically served salad on Ethan's plate without him even asking. "It's comforting to see that some things never change." "Mom," Ethan murmured, feeling a strange warmth rise up his neck. "What?" "It's true. You take care of each other in such a special way." Stella blushed slightly, playing with the food on her plate. It's just friendship, Mrs. Brooks," We've known each other for a long time." "Of course, dear. Of course." But there was something in Ethan's mother's tone that suggested she saw more than they were willing to admit. During town events, the fall festival, the Saturday farmers market, performances at the community center, Ethan and Stella were always seen together. They had a natural, almost choreographed dynamic. Stella would hold Ethan's arm when she wore high heels. He automatically ordered 2 coffees when they stopped at the diner. She knew exactly what kind of food he would want to buy at the festival stands. "You're the cutest couple," commented Mrs. Larson, who owned the flower shop, when they passed by her booth during the spring festival. "We're not a couple," Stella corrected quickly, but her voice came out a little higher than normal. "Oh, sorry, you have really good energy together." Ethan felt a strange pang in his chest. It wasn't exactly irritation, but something he couldn't identify. "We're just friends," he said, perhaps more firmly than necessary. "Of course, dears. Of course." The townspeople always made these comments, and Ethan and Stella always corrected them. But lately, these corrections were starting to sound hollow, even to themselves. It was hard to ignore the small moments that seemed to carry extra weight, like when Stella was organizing books on a high shelf, and Ethan came up behind her to help her reach, his body almost touching her back. For a second, Stella became completely still, feeling his warmth so close. The familiar scent of his cologne mixed with something more masculine and mature. "Got it?" Ethan asked softly, his voice close to her ear. "Got it," Stella replied, but her voice came out as a whisper. When she turned around, they were face to face, so close that Ethan could count the small freckles on her nose. For an endless moment, neither of them moved. Stella's eyes briefly dropped to his lips before returning to his gaze, and Ethan felt as if the air had grown thicker. "Stella," he began, not knowing exactly what he was going to say. The bookstore's door chime rang as a customer entered, breaking the moment like a broken spell. They quickly moved apart, Stella nervously smoothing her hair while Ethan cleared his throat and pretended to be very interested in the books on the shelf. There were also the nights when one of them was going through a personal crisis. When Stella's car broke down, and she had to use all her savings to fix it, Ethan showed up at her door with a bottle of wine and Chinese food, instinctively knowing she needed company. When Ethan received news that his grandfather was sick, Stella canceled all her plans and spent the entire night talking with him, letting him vent all his fears about loss and mortality. "You always know exactly what I need," Ethan said that night, as they sat on his couch, Stella's head resting on his shoulder. "It's what we do for each other," she replied simply. "We always have." But there was something different in the way she said it. A softness that made Ethan look down at her face. Stella was looking at him too, and for a moment, Ethan wondered what it would be like to kiss her. The thought came out of nowhere, so clear and intense that he almost gasped. Stella seemed to notice the change in his breathing. "Ethan, nothing," he said quickly, forcing a smile. "Just, thank you for being here always," she whispered. And there was something in the way she said always that made Ethan's heart race in a way he couldn't explain as purely friendship. The touches were becoming more frequent, too. Not different touches necessarily, but Ethan was beginning to notice each one in a new way. Stella's hand on his arm when she laughed at a joke, the way she automatically straightened his shirt collar when it was crooked, how their fingers touched when they passed popcorn to each other during movies. During a particularly hot Sunday lunch, Stella wore a yellow summer dress that made her eyes look greener. Ethan found himself watching the way the fabric moved when she gestured animatedly, telling a story about an eccentric bookstore customer. When she leaned over to reach for the salt, the neckline of her dress opened slightly, and Ethan quickly looked away, feeling a wave of heat that had nothing to do with the weather. "Are you okay?" Stella asked, noticing he had gone quiet. "You look a bit red." "I'm fine," Ethan lied. "It's just hot." But it wasn't just the heat. It was something deeper, more complicated, something that had been growing inside him for months and that he was desperately trying to ignore because Stella was his best friend. She was his anchor, his constant, the person he trusted most in the world. And acknowledging that he was feeling something different for her, something that made his pulse quicken and his thoughts drift into dangerous territory, would mean risking everything they had built together. So he kept pretending that nothing had changed, that the lingering looks and seemingly innocent touches were just part of their friendship. But pretending was becoming increasingly difficult, especially on nights when they still shared the same bed, as they always had. And Ethan lay awake, listening to Stella's soft breathing, wondering what would happen if he turned and pulled her closer, wondering what would happen if he finally admitted that maybe, Just maybe. Just friends wasn't enough anymore. Fall came to Willowbrook with unusual intensity that year. The leaves changed color more quickly, painting the town in dramatic shades of red and gold. And weather forecasts warned of a storm approaching the East Coast, the biggest in 5 years. Ethan was checking the windows of his house when his phone rang. It was Stella, and there was an urgency in her voice he rarely heard. "Ethan, can you help me with something? I know it's asking a lot, but, of course, what do you need?" "Remember my dad's old family house in Connecticut? The one that went to my mom in the divorce?" Ethan vaguely remembered. Stella had mentioned the property a few times over the years. A country house the family rarely visited, situated in a rural area surrounded by forests. "Yeah, I remember. What about it?" "My mom wants to sell it finally. She asked me to go there this weekend and do an inventory of the furniture, see what's worth keeping before putting the house on the market. But with this storm approaching," Stella paused, "I don't want to go alone. It's kind of isolated there. And if the storm really is as strong as they're predicting, you want me to go with you, would you? I know it's asking a lot, especially with the bad weather, but I really don't want to do this alone." Ethan didn't hesitate for a second. "Of course, I'll go. When do you want to leave?" "Now? I know it's kind of last minute, but if the storm hits sooner than expected, we could be stuck there for days." 2 hours later, they were on the road toward Connecticut, the sky gradually darkening above them. Stella drove her small sedan, hands steady on the wheel, while Ethan navigated using his phone's GPS. Conversation flowed naturally between them, as always. But there was an underlying tension in the air, part anticipation about the storm, part something harder to define. "How long has it been since you've been there?" Ethan asked, watching the heavy clouds accumulating on the horizon. "About 3 years, maybe 4. My mom used to take me there when I was little, especially after the divorce. It was her place to clear her head, as she put it," Stella said with a nostalgic smile. "I always loved that house. There's something about it. It's like time stops there." They drove down increasingly narrow roads, leaving civilization behind. The trees closed in around the road like a natural cathedral, their branches intertwining overhead to form a canopy that blocked out most of the daylight. The GPS indicated they should turn onto a dirt road, and Ethan saw Stella frown when the car's wheels began crunching on gravel. "I hope it doesn't rain before we can get out of here," she murmured. "This road turns to mud when it's wet." The house appeared after a curve, and Ethan immediately understood why Stella had affection for this place. It was a 2-story colonial construction with white painted wood siding that had acquired a soft patina over time. A wide porch wrapped around the entire front of the house, with rocking chairs that seemed to be waiting for visitors. Ivy grew up the sidewalls, and there was something simultaneously majestic and melancholy about the property. "It's beautiful," Ethan said, getting out of the car and breathing the fresh forest air. "Yeah, right. My mom always said this house had a soul," Stella replied, grabbing a bag from the back seat. "Come on, let me show you the inside." The front door creaked when Stella opened it, and they were greeted by the smell of old wood and something floral, perhaps old perfume or forgotten potpourri. The house was furnished, but covered in white sheets, like ghosts of a past life. Stella began uncovering the furniture, while Ethan explored the rooms, admiring the architectural details, ornate moldings, a stone fireplace, tall windows that offered stunning views of the surrounding forest. "The master bedroom is upstairs," Stella said, climbing the wooden staircase that creaked softly under her feet. "My mom always said it was the heart of the house." Ethan followed her, noticing how Stella moved through the house with familiarity, even after so many years. The master bedroom was spacious, with a double bed covered by a white sheet and windows overlooking the back of the property. Stella pulled away the sheet, revealing an antique bed with an ornate iron headboard. "This bed is an antique," she said, running her hand over the smooth iron surface. "My great-grandmother slept in it. My grandmother. My mother." It's kind of romantic thinking about the history it holds. Ethan approached, observing the details of the ironwork. "Looks solid. It'll probably last another 100 years. "Yeah, probably." Stella looked out the window, where the first raindrops were beginning to form on the glass. "I think the storm is coming earlier than predicted." As if responding to her words, distant thunder echoed through the forest. Ethan joined her at the window, and they both watched the dark clouds moving quickly toward the house. The wind was beginning to pick up, making the trees sway dramatically. "Maybe we should consider heading back," Ethan suggested, though something inside him didn't want to leave this place. There was something about the house, about being there alone with Stella, that felt significant in a way he couldn't explain. "It's too late," Stella said, pointing to the window. The rain was starting to fall harder, and they could hear the wind moaning through the trees. "That dirt road will be impassable within minutes. Looks like we're spending the night here." The reality of the situation settled between them. They were alone in an isolated house in the middle of the forest, with a storm approaching rapidly. It was as if the universe had conspired to put them in this situation. "Well," Ethan said, trying to sound casual, "at least the house seems solid, and I'm sure we have everything we need." "There's canned food in the pantry," Stella said, "and firewood for the fireplace. My mom always kept the house prepared for emergencies." She turned to him, and there was something in her eyes that Ethan couldn't decipher. "It'll be like when we were kids, an adventure." "Yeah," he agreed, but his voice came out a little rougher than he intended. "Like when we were kids, but they weren't kids anymore." And there was something in the way Stella looked at him, in the way silence stretched between them, that made it clear they both knew this night would be different from all the others they had spent together. The storm hit with full force when the sun set. Wind howled around the house, making the windows rattle and tree branches beat against the roof. Ethan had managed to light the fireplace, and the crackling of the fire offered a comforting counterpoint to the chaos outside. "I'm glad you came with me," Stella said, settling onto the sofa near the fireplace. She had changed clothes, wearing a soft wool sweater and sweatpants that made her look younger, more vulnerable. "I wouldn't have had the courage to stay here alone with this storm." "You know I'll always be here when you need me," Ethan replied, sitting beside her. The sofa was small, and he was very conscious of their proximity, of the warmth emanating from her body. A particularly intense lightning bolt illuminated the room, immediately followed by deafening thunder that made Stella jump and instinctively move closer to Ethan. She laughed nervously. "Sorry, I know it's silly, but storms still make me nervous." "It's not silly," Ethan said softly. "It's human." They sat there, listening to the storm, the fire crackling in the fireplace, creating a bubble of warmth and light amid the chaos outside. With each lightning flash and thunderclap, Stella moved imperceptibly closer, until she was practically pressed against Ethan. He could smell her perfume, vanilla and something floral, that always made him think of home. "Ethan," Stella said quietly, her voice almost lost in the storm's noise. "Do you ever wonder what it would be like if we were different?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with possibilities. Ethan felt his heart race. Different how? Stella lifted her head to look at him, and in the dancing firelight, her eyes looked golden. "If we weren't just, if we were more than—" Another thunderclap cut off her words, but Ethan understood what she was trying to say, the same question that had been growing in his mind for months, maybe years. "Stella," he began, but didn't know how to finish. She was so close now that he could see the small freckles on her nose, could feel her breath against his skin. There was something inevitable about the moment, as if all the nights they had spent together, all the years of friendship and complicity, had been building toward this exact instant. When Stella leaned slightly toward him, Ethan felt like he was standing at the edge of a cliff. Part of him wanted to pull away, to protect the friendship that was the most precious thing in his life. But a bigger, deeper part wanted to discover what would happen if he finally stopped pretending she was just his best friend. The wind howled louder, and the firelight flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. And in that moment, suspended between storm and warmth, between past and future, Ethan knew that nothing between them would ever be the same. The storm had arrived, and with it, something they had been avoiding for a long time was finally about to emerge from the shadows. The storm continued roaring outside, turning the night into a wild symphony of wind, rain, and thunder. Ethan and Stella remained on the sofa near the fireplace, the silence between them thick with unexplored possibilities. Stella's question still hung in the air. "Do you ever wonder what it would be like if we were different?" And Ethan felt like he was balancing on the edge of an abyss. "We should go upstairs," Stella said finally, her voice barely audible above the storm's noise. "It's getting late, and tomorrow we have to organize everything before heading back." Ethan nodded, though part of him wanted to stay there forever, in that suspended moment where everything was still possible and nothing had been ruined. They climbed the creaking staircase, the wood groaning under their feet, as if the house itself were sighing. The master bedroom was plunged in shadows, lit only by occasional lightning that created ghostly patterns on the walls. Stella lit some candles she found on the dresser, and the soft light transformed the atmosphere into something almost magical. "The bed is big enough for both of us," she said, avoiding looking directly at Ethan. Like we always do. Of course, he agreed, but his voice came out slightly tense. They prepared for sleep with the familiarity of years of practice, but there was a new awareness in every movement. Ethan was intensely conscious of every sound Stella made. The rustle of fabric when she changed clothes behind a makeshift screen, the soft sound of her bare feet on the wooden floor, the way she sighed as she settled into bed. When Ethan lay down beside her, the mattress dipped slightly, making them naturally roll toward each other. It was something that had happened thousands of times before, but this time, when Stella's shoulder touched his arm, Ethan felt an electric current run through his body. "This storm isn't going to stop," Stella murmured, turning on her side to face him. In the flickering candlelight, she looked different, softer, more vulnerable, more woman than the girl he had known for so many years. "No," Ethan agreed, also turning to face her. They were close now, close enough for him to see every detail of her face, the gentle curve of her eyebrows, the way her lips parted slightly, how her eyelashes cast small shadows on her cheeks. A particularly intense lightning bolt illuminated the room, immediately followed by thunder that made the entire house shake. Stella startled, instinctively moving closer to Ethan, her hand finding his chest. "Sorry," she whispered, but didn't pull away. "You don't need to apologize," Ethan replied, his voice soft. He could feel the warmth of her palm through the thin fabric of his t-shirt, could feel her perfume enveloping him like a soft cloud. Another thunderclap echoed, and this time Stella nestled even closer, her face now inches from him. Ethan could feel her breath against his skin, warm and slightly irregular. "Ethan," she whispered, and there was something in her voice he had never heard before, a raw vulnerability, a barely disguised desire. "Stella." He raised his hand hesitantly, his fingers trembling slightly when they touched her face. Her skin was even softer than he had imagined, warm and silky under his fingertips. Stella closed her eyes at his touch, a small sigh escaping her lips. "We shouldn't," Ethan began, but his own voice seemed distant, as if it were coming from far away. "I know," Stella whispered, but her words were contradicted by the way she leaned into his touch, by the way her hand moved from his chest to the nape of his neck, her fingers threading through his hair. The wind howled louder, and another lightning bolt illuminated the room. In the brief moment of clarity, their eyes met, and Ethan saw there everything he had been feeling reflected in her gaze. The desire, the confusion, the love that had grown from something pure and simple into something complex and overwhelming. When darkness returned, the space between them seemed to shrink on its own. Ethan didn't know if he leaned in first, or if it was Stella, or if they both moved simultaneously, drawn by a force they could no longer resist. When their lips touched, it was as if an electrical circuit had closed. The kiss was soft at first, hesitant, almost questioning, but when Stella responded, pressing closer to him, something broke inside Ethan. Years of repressed desire, of denied feelings, of unasked questions exploded in a wave of need that left him dizzy. He deepened the kiss, one hand burying itself in her silky hair, while the other moved to her waist, pulling her even closer. Stella moaned softly against his lips, the sound sending shockwaves through his body. They kissed as if they were drowning and found air in each other. It wasn't the hesitant kiss of first dates or the curious exploration of youth. It was the kiss of two people who knew each other completely, but were discovering themselves in an entirely new way. When they finally separated, both were breathing heavily. Stella looked at him with wide eyes, as if she couldn't believe what had just happened. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder and something close to fear. "I know," he replied, running his thumb gently across her cheek. "I know." They remained like that for a moment, foreheads touching, breaths mingling, trying to process the magnitude of what had changed between them. Outside, the storm continued, but inside the room, a different kind of storm was forming. One made of years of repressed feelings. Finally finding expression, Stella moved slightly, and Ethan felt every point where her body touched his. Her knee brushing his leg, her hand still resting on his chest. The way she fit perfectly against him, as if she had been made to be there. "This changes everything," she whispered. "I know," Ethan repeated, but this time there was acceptance in his voice, a surrender to the inevitable. Another thunderclap roared, closer this time, and Stella trembled slightly. Without thinking, Ethan pulled her closer, wrapping her in his arms in a way that was simultaneously protective and intimate. She settled against him, her head nestled in his shoulder, one leg intertwining with his. "Are you cold?" he asked, though the room was warm. "A little," She lied, and they both knew it wasn't cold that made her tremble. Ethan pulled the blanket over them, creating a cocoon of warmth and intimacy. In the darkness under the blanket, he could feel every breath she took, every heartbeat against his chest. His hand rested on her back, and he could feel the softness of her skin through the thin fabric of her nightgown. "Ethan," Stella said after a long silence. "Do you regret it?" The question hung between them. Ethan thought about all the reasons he should regret it. The friendship they might be risking, the simplicity they had lost, the complications that would come. But when he looked at her face in the dim light, when he saw the vulnerability in her eyes, when he felt how right it seemed to have her in his arms, there was only one possible answer. "No," he said firmly. "Do you?" Stella smiled, the first genuine smile since the kiss had happened. "No, actually, I think I've been waiting for this for a long time." "How long?" Ethan asked, curiosity and something like relief coloring his voice. "I don't know. Maybe always, or maybe I only realized it when you came back home." She paused, her fingers tracing unconscious patterns on his chest. "What about you?" Ethan thought about the question, trying to identify when exactly his perception of Stella had changed. "I think it was gradual, like waking up slowly. One day you just realize you're not sleeping anymore." She laughed softly. "That's a terrible metaphor. Hey, I'm not the writer here." "No, you're not." She lifted her head to look at him, but it's a terrible and perfect metaphor at the same time. They laughed together, and there was something liberating about the ease of that moment. They were still themselves, still had the same connection, the same humor, the same ease with each other. But now there were additional layers, depths they were just beginning to explore. When the laughter faded, they found themselves looking at each other again, and the tension returned, not uncomfortable, but charged with possibilities. Ethan raised his hand to touch her face again, marveling at the softness of her skin, at the way she leaned into his touch. "What do we do now?" Stella asked softly. "I don't know," Ethan admitted. But I want to find out with you, even if it's complicated. Especially because it's going to be complicated." Stella smiled again, and this time when she leaned in to kiss him, there was no hesitation. It was a kiss of promise, of possibility, of two best friends finally admitting that maybe they had always been something more. Outside, the storm began to slowly subside, but inside the room, a new storm was just beginning, one made of hearts discovering themselves, of hands exploring familiar territories in completely new ways, of two people who thought they knew all the answers, discovering they were just beginning to ask the right questions. And when they finally fell asleep, still intertwined, still whispering confessions in the darkness, they both knew they had crossed a line from which they could never return, nor did they want to. Morning arrived with a cruel clarity that transformed the magic of the previous night into something that seemed almost unreal. Ethan woke first, the first rays of sunlight filtering through the curtains and illuminating the room that looked completely different in daylight. For a moment, he was disoriented, forgetting where he was. Then he felt the soft weight of Stella's body nestled against his, and everything came back. The storm, the kiss, the way she had fit perfectly in his arms. Stella was sleeping peacefully, her hair spread across the pillow, one hand resting on his chest. In the soft morning light, she looked younger, more vulnerable, and Ethan felt a wave of tenderness so intense it almost hurt. But along with the tenderness came panic. What had they done? 20 years of friendship, and they had complicated everything in a single night. Ethan closed his eyes, trying to return to the state of certainty he had felt in the darkness. But daylight brought with it all the doubts that the storm had temporarily swept away. Stella stirred beside him, and Ethan felt the exact moment she woke up, the subtle change in her breathing, the tension that ran through her body when the reality of the situation set in. "Ethan," she whispered without opening her eyes. "I'm here." She pulled away slightly, creating space between them, and Ethan immediately missed her warmth. When Stella finally opened her eyes, there was a confusion in them that perfectly mirrored what he was feeling. She began, then stopped. "Yes," Ethan confirmed softly. "We kissed." The words hung between them, making real what could have been just a dream. Stella sat up in bed, running her hands through her tousled hair, avoiding looking at him. I should take a shower," she said, her voice strangely formal, "and then we can organize things and go back home." There was something in the way she said "go back home" that made Ethan's stomach tighten, as if she were desperate to escape, not just from the house, but from the reality of what had happened between them. "Stella, we need to talk about this." "Talk about what?" she asked, finally looking at him, but there was a distance in her eyes that wasn't there the night before. It was just because of the storm. People do strange things when they're scared. Ethan felt like she had punched him in the stomach. You think it was just because of the storm? Stella got up from the bed, picking up her clothes from the floor. I don't know what it was, Ethan, but I know we can't let one strange night ruin 20 years of friendship. What if it doesn't ruin it? What if it's something good? She stopped mid-movement, her back still turned to him. What if it's something terrible? What if we find out we're not compatible that way? What if we become awkward with each other? What if we lose everything we have? Each question was like a small stab, but Ethan understood her fear because he felt the same. We don't know if that will happen. Exactly. We don't know. Stella turned to him, and there were tears in her eyes. Ethan, you're the most important person in my life. I can't risk losing you because of a moment of confusion. Her words were logical, sensible, exactly what a rational part of Ethan was thinking. But there was another part of him, a part that had awakened when their lips touched, that rebelled against the idea of pretending nothing had happened. So that's it? He asked. We're going to pretend it didn't happen? I think it's the safest thing. The safest? Ethan repeated, and there was bitterness in his voice. When did we start worrying about what's safe? Stella looked at him for a long moment, and Ethan saw the struggle happening in her eyes. Desire fighting against fear, curiosity battling with prudence. Since we have something to lose, she said finally. The trip back to Willowbrook was tense, in a way Ethan had never experienced with Stella. They talked about superficial things, the weather, the house's furniture, her plans for the bookstore, but there was a chasm between them that wasn't there 2 days before. Every silence seemed loaded. Every accidental glance was quickly averted. When Stella dropped him off at his house, she barely waited for him to get out of the car before speeding away, offering only a quick wave and a talk later that sounded more like a goodbye. The following days were a peculiar form of torture. Ethan tried to resume his normal routine, but everything reminded him of Stella. The coffee he always ordered for her at the diner, the bookstore where he spent his afternoons, even his own bed, where he could feel the ghost of her presence. He avoided the bookstore for 3 days, but finally, the need to see her overcame his reluctance. When he entered, Stella was helping a customer, and for a moment, before she noticed his presence, Ethan could observe her. She looked different. More tense, perhaps. There was a stiffness in her shoulders that wasn't there before. Ethan, she said when she saw him, and her smile was too bright, too forced. What a surprise, I haven't seen you in a few days. I've been busy, he lied. Of course you have. They stood there, looking at each other, and Ethan could feel the weight of all the unspoken things between them. The customer Stella was helping looked from one to the other with curiosity. Well, the woman said, you two have interesting energy. How long have you been together? We're not together, Stella said quickly, perhaps too quickly. We're just friends. The words hit Ethan like a slap. Just friends, he repeated. Yes, Stella confirmed, but she couldn't look him in the eyes when she said it. The customer seemed embarrassed. Oh, sorry, you seemed, well, sorry. After the woman left, silence settled between them like a heavy cloud. Ethan approached the counter, where Stella was pretending to be busy organizing papers. How are you? He asked softly. Fine. Great. Actually, she still wasn't looking at him. And you, Stella? Look at me. She hesitated for a moment before raising her eyes. When she did, Ethan saw there were shadows there that didn't exist before, a sadness she was trying to hide. I'm fine, Ethan. Really? You don't look fine. And how should I look? The question was loaded with challenge, but Ethan could hear the plea for help underneath it. I don't know, but not like this. Not like you're afraid of me. I'm not afraid of you, Stella said, but her voice trembled slightly. Then what are you afraid of? Stella closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, there was raw vulnerability in them, of ruining everything, of finding out we're terrible together that way, of having to choose between having you as a friend or not having you at all. Ethan felt his heart clench. Stella. No, she interrupted. Please, Ethan, I need time to think, to figure out what I feel. Can you give me that? It was the last thing Ethan wanted to do. Every fiber of his being wanted to pull her into his arms, kiss her until all the confusion disappeared, but he could see the genuine panic in her eyes, could feel how hard she was struggling. How much time, Stella? He asked. I don't know. Just time. Ethan nodded, though he felt like he was agreeing to his own execution. Okay, but Stella, that night, it was real. For me, it was real. He left the bookstore before she could respond, but not before seeing tears forming in her eyes. The following weeks were the hardest Ethan had ever lived through. They still saw each other. Willowbrook was too small to avoid completely, but there was an awkwardness between them that had never existed before. Their conversations were polite, but superficial, like two strangers who had been introduced at a party. During Sunday dinners at his parents' house, they sat farther apart than usual. When they met on the street, they exchanged polite greetings, but the hugs had disappeared. Casual touches were carefully avoided. Ethan found himself analyzing every interaction, looking for signs that Stella was feeling the same confusion he was. Sometimes he thought he caught a lingering look, a moment of hesitation before she pulled away. But then she would smile, that bright fake smile, and he wondered if he was just seeing what he wanted to see. Ethan's mother was the first to comment on the change. "Did you two have a fight?" she asked during a particularly tense dinner. "You've barely talked all evening." "We didn't fight," Ethan said. "We're just going through a weird phase." "What kind of weird phase?" Ethan looked at Stella, who was focused intently on her plate. "It's complicated, Mom. The best things in life usually are complicated." "Dear." After dinner, Ethan was helping wash dishes when Stella appeared in the kitchen. For a moment, they were alone, and Ethan felt the familiarity return. The ease of working side by side, the comfort of each other's presence. "I miss you," Stella said softly, without looking at him. Ethan's heart leaped. "I miss you too, but I still don't know what to do about it. What if? What if we didn't do anything? What if we just let it be whatever it is?" Stella finally looked at him, and there was as much desire as fear in her eyes. What if it's a disaster? What if it's incredible? They stood there, suspended between possibility and fear, until Ethan's mother entered the kitchen, breaking the moment. But Ethan saw something change in Stella's face in that instant. A softening, an opening, and for the first time in weeks, he felt hope. Maybe she was finally ready to stop running from what was between them. Maybe they were both ready to discover what would happen if they stopped being so afraid of ruining everything and started considering the possibility that they might be building something extraordinary. 3 weeks after the conversation in the kitchen, the invitation arrived like a bolt from the blue. Clara Evans, one of Stella's college friends, was getting married in Manhattan, and the ceremony would be followed by an elaborate reception at a 5-star hotel on the Upper East Side. The invitation included accommodations for out-of-town guests, and Clara had specifically requested that Stella bring that gorgeous friend who was always with her in Facebook photos. Stella looked at the elegant invitation in her hands, feeling her stomach tighten. She had casually mentioned the wedding to Ethan a few weeks earlier, when they were still navigating the turbulent waters of their new dynamic. At the time, it seemed like a distant, irrelevant event. Now, with the date approaching rapidly, she realized she had created an impossible situation for herself. "So," she said when Ethan appeared at the bookstore that afternoon, "remember Clara's wedding I mentioned?" Ethan was flipping through a photography book but looked up when he heard the cautious tone in her voice. "Yeah. What about it?" "Well, she kind of expects you to come with me. And she reserved a room at the hotel for us." "One room." Stella paused, feeling a blush rise up her neck. "I can cancel. I can say you're sick, or do you want me to go?" Ethan asked, closing the book and approaching the counter. The simple question caught her off guard. She had expected him to decline, to find an excuse to avoid the potentially explosive situation. Instead, he was looking at her with those blue eyes that always managed to see through all her defenses. Stella hesitated. The honest answer was yes. She wanted him to go. She wanted it desperately. The last few weeks of careful distance had been torture, and the idea of an entire weekend with him, even under complicated circumstances, was too tempting to resist. "Yes, I want you to go. Then I'll go. Ethan, you understand that we'll have to share a room and that everyone will assume we're a couple." Something passed through his eyes, a flash of what could have been hope. "I understand. And you're okay with that. The question is, are you okay with that?" Stella looked at him for a long moment. There were so many layers to that simple question. So many implications. "I think we're going to find out." The train ride to New York was surprisingly peaceful. They talked about safe things, work, family, Stella's plans to expand the bookstore, but there was an underlying current of tension, an awareness of the situation they were putting themselves in. Ethan had brought a small suitcase and was wearing a blue shirt that brought out his eyes in a way that made Stella have to consciously avoid looking at him for too long. The hotel was impressive, all marble and crystal chandeliers, the kind of place where Stella felt slightly out of place. When they approached the front desk, Ethan placed his hand on her back, a protective and intimate gesture that sent shivers down her spine. "Reservation for Morgan?" Stella said to the receptionist. "Ah, yes, suite 1247. You're here for the Evans wedding?" "Yes." "How wonderful. I hope you have a romantic stay." The man smiled at them in a way that made it clear he assumed they were a couple in love. Stella felt her face heat up, but Ethan just smiled politely. "Thank you." The room was intimate, an elegant suite with a large king-size bed, a cozy sitting area, and windows that offered a stunning view of Central Park. Stella stopped in the doorway, staring at the bed that dominated the space. "I can sleep on the couch," Ethan offered, correctly interpreting her hesitation. "Don't be ridiculous. It's a huge bed. We can share without it being weird." But even as she said it, Stella knew she was lying. Everything about the situation was weird. Weirdly intimate. Weirdly tempting. Weirdly like they were actually a couple having a romantic weekend in New York. They prepared for the ceremony with the efficiency of people who had known each other for decades. Ethan showered first, emerging from the bathroom with damp hair and wearing dress pants and a white shirt that Stella had to admit looked devastatingly good on him. When it was her turn, she chose a navy blue dress that accentuated her silhouette without being too daring. But when she came out of the bathroom, the way Ethan looked at her made her heart race. "You look beautiful," he said softly. "Thank you." She approached the mirror to put on her earrings, and Ethan appeared behind her, their eyes meeting in the reflection. "Need help with the necklace?" he asked, noticing the jewelry in her hands. Stella nodded, handing him the delicate pearl necklace. When Ethan positioned himself behind her to fasten it, his fingers brushed the sensitive skin of her nape, and Stella had to grip the dresser to keep from visibly trembling. "Done," he said. But his hands remained on her shoulders for a moment longer than necessary. In the mirror, Stella could see them together. Her, elegant in the blue dress. Him, devastatingly handsome in the suit. Both looking exactly like a couple who was deeply in love. The image was so convincing that for a moment, she almost believed it herself. The ceremony was beautiful. Held on the hotel's rooftop with a view of the city, Stella and Ethan sat close together, as expected. And when the bride and groom exchanged vows about eternal love and commitment, Stella felt Ethan's eyes on her. When she turned to look at him, there was something in his expression that made her heart skip a beat. During the reception, they were inevitably drawn into the social dynamics of a wedding. Clara introduced them as "my dear friends from Willowbrook," with a smile that made it clear she assumed they were more than friends. Other guests made comments about what a beautiful couple they made, how long they'd been together, when it would be their turn. "You two have that energy," said an older woman during the cocktail hour. "That energy of people who are completely comfortable with each other. It's rare to see that." "We've known each other for a long time," Stella replied diplomatically. "Ah, childhood sweethearts. The best kind. My husband and I grew up together, too. 43 years married next month." Ethan reached over to grab a champagne flute for Stella, such a natural and considerate gesture that the woman smiled approvingly. "See? He doesn't even need to ask what you want. That's a true partner." When it came time to dance, Stella knew it would be inevitable. The band was playing a slow, romantic song, and couples filled the dance floor. Ethan extended his hand to her with a somewhat shy smile. "Dance with me." Stella placed her hand in his, and they made their way to the dance floor. When Ethan pulled her into his arms, Stella felt like she was coming home. They fit perfectly. Their height, the way she adjusted against him, how their hands naturally intertwined. "Remember the last time we danced?" Ethan asked, his voice low near her ear. "Prom," Stella replied. "You stepped on my foot 3 times. I was nervous." "Why were you nervous?" "It was just me." Ethan spun her gently before pulling her back close. Maybe that was the problem. The words hung between them, loaded with meaning. Stella looked at him, searching his eyes for clues about what he meant. But before she could ask, the music changed to something more upbeat, and the moment was lost. Later, after hours of conversation, dancing, and champagne, they returned to their room. Stella was slightly dizzy, not so much from the alcohol, but from the intensity of spending an entire day pretending to be half of a couple with Ethan. It had been surprisingly easy, surprisingly natural, maybe too easy. "That was an interesting day," Ethan said, loosening his tie. "Interesting is one word for it." Stella sat on the edge of the bed to take off her shoes, relieved to get rid of the high heels. Everyone assumed that we were together. Yes. And how did you feel about that? The question caught her off guard. Stella had expected them to avoid discussing the elephant in the room, to pretend that everyone's assumptions hadn't affected anything between them. Honestly, she said, looking at him, it was easier than I expected. Pretending, I mean, maybe because we weren't pretending as much as we thought. Ethan's words hung in the air between them. Stella felt her heart race, the familiarity of the moment in the bookstore returning. That feeling of being on the verge of something momentous. Ethan, I know you said you needed time, and I've respected that, but Stella, today was like getting a glimpse of how things could be. Stella stood up, walking to the window overlooking the city lights. Ethan followed her, stopping right behind her. You felt it too, didn't you? He asked softly. How natural it was. How we fit. Stella closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of his body behind hers. I did. So, what do we do now? She turned to face him, and what she saw in his eyes, hope, desire, love, almost knocked her over. There were so many reasons to be cautious, so many unresolved fears, but there was also the memory of the day, how easily they had moved together, how they fit, not just physically, but emotionally. I don't know, she admitted, but maybe it's time to stop being so afraid of finding out. Ethan took a step closer, raising his hand to touch her face. Are you sure? Stella leaned into his touch, feeling weeks of tension and confusion begin to dissolve. No, but maybe some things are worth risking, even when you're not sure. When Ethan leaned in to kiss her, Stella didn't pull away. And this time, when their lips met, there was no storm to blame, no external circumstances to use as an excuse. There were just the two of them, finally ready to stop fighting against something that maybe had always been inevitable. The kiss in the hotel room was different from the first one they had shared during the storm. There wasn't the desperate urgency of discovery, nor the panic of novelty. Instead, there was a deliberate softness, a conscious exploration of something they had both finally decided to accept. When they separated, Stella remained close, her hands resting on Ethan's chest, feeling the rapid beating of his heart under his shirt. Does this mean we stop pretending we're just friends? Ethan asked, his voice soft. I think it means we've discovered that maybe we were never just friends. Stella replied. At least not completely. They spent the night talking, something they had done thousands of times before. But now, with additional layers of honesty they had never allowed themselves to explore, lying on the large bed, dressed but close, they finally began to unwrap the feelings that had been carefully stored away for years. When did you know? Stella asked, her head resting on Ethan's shoulder. When did you realize you felt more? Ethan was quiet for a moment, his fingers tracing unconscious patterns on her arm. I think there were several moments, small awakenings. Remember when I came back from Richmond, and you were at the bookstore organizing books on that high shelf? I remember you were wearing that yellow dress, and when you turned to greet me, there was a second when I saw you differently, like I was seeing you for the first time. He paused. But I think I really knew at your mom's birthday party about 2 months ago. Stella lifted her head to look at him. Why? What happened? You were laughing at something my dad had said, and you had a little frosting from the cake at the corner of your mouth. I wanted to clean it off, but not with a napkin. He stopped, blushing slightly. I wanted to kiss you right there in front of everyone, and it was the first time I allowed that thought to really form in my mind. It was terrifying. Stella smiled, running her finger along his jawline. I remember that day. You got weird after dinner. I thought you were upset with me about something. I wasn't upset. I was terrified. Ethan captured her hand, intertwining their fingers. What about you? When did you know? Stella thought for a moment, trying to identify the exact moment when her perception had changed. Remember when your car broke down last year and I went to pick you up at the shop? Yes. You came out covered in grease because you had tried to help the mechanic. And when you got in my car, you apologized for being dirty. But I thought you were beautiful. Not just handsome, but beautiful in a way that made my heart ache. She paused. It was the first time I allowed myself to really look at you as a man. And it was terrible because I realized there was a part of me that had always looked at you that way. I just had never admitted it. Why was it terrible? Because you were safe. You had always been my constant, my anchor. And suddenly you weren't safe anymore because I wanted things I shouldn't want. Ethan turned on his side to face her completely. What kind of things? Stella blushed, but held his gaze. I wanted to know what it would be like to wake up in your arms for real, not just as friends. I wanted to know if your hands would be soft or rough on my skin. I wanted—" She hesitated. "What?" "I wanted to know if you thought about me the same way, Ethan." His voice was soft, full of a tenderness that made her eyes fill with tears. "I did think about you. God, how I thought about you." They lay there for a moment, absorbing the magnitude of the confessions they had shared. It wasn't just physical attraction, it was years of love that had evolved and deepened without either of them having the courage to acknowledge it. "Why did it take us so long?" Stella asked. "Fear," Ethan replied simply. "Fear of ruining what we had. Fear of finding out we wouldn't work that way. Fear of losing you. And now I'm still afraid," he admitted. "But I'm more afraid of wasting more time pretending this doesn't exist." Stella moved closer, until there was no space between them. "Ethan, I need to tell you something about why I got so scared after that night in Connecticut." "Okay." "It wasn't just fear of ruining our friendship. It was because when you kissed me, I knew immediately that I was lost, that if I let it happen, there would be no going back. Because it wasn't just physical desire, it was everything. Complete, total love, the kind that changes everything." Ethan became very quiet. "And that scared you?" "It terrified me because loving you that way means you have the power to destroy me completely." "Stella," he held her face between his hands. "Do you think it's not the same for me? Do you think you don't have the same power over me?" There were tears in her eyes now. "I don't want to hurt you, Ethan, and I don't want you to hurt me." "Then let's not hurt each other," he said softly. "Let's be careful with each other. Let's communicate. Let's make it work. What if we can't? What if we can?" It was the same question they had asked each other several times in recent weeks. But this time, Stella felt something different in her response. Hope. Possibility. A willingness to try that was stronger than fear. "I love you," she said suddenly, the words coming out before she could censor herself. "Not just as my best friend. I love you like you're part of me. Like I was born to love you." Ethan closed his eyes, as if her words were a prayer he had waited his whole life to hear. "Stella, I know it's intense. I know it's scary. But it's true. And I'm tired of pretending it's not." When Ethan opened his eyes, there were tears in them. "I love you too. I've always loved you. But now it's different. It's bigger. It's like all the love I felt for you over the years has transformed into something that doesn't fit in my chest." They kissed again, and this time there was a promise in the kiss, a promise of honesty, of vulnerability, of courage to explore what was between them without fear of destroying what they already had. "So what do we do now?" Stella asked against his lips. "Now we stop being afraid," Ethan replied. "Now we see where this takes us. Even if it's complicated? Especially because it's going to be complicated. The best things always are." Stella smiled, feeling like a huge weight had been lifted from her shoulders. For the first time in months, she wasn't fighting against her feelings. She was embracing them. "Ethan, thank you for waiting, for giving me time to get here. Thank you for getting here." They fell asleep intertwined, not just physically, but emotionally. And for the first time, there was no pretense that they were just friends sharing a bed. They were two people who loved each other deeply, who had finally found the courage to admit it, and who were ready to discover what love could build on the solid foundation of a lifelong friendship. Outside, New York continued its nightly dance of lights and movement. But inside the room, there was only peace. The peace that comes when you finally stop fighting against your own heart and allow it to guide you toward what you always knew was true. That some loves are too big to be contained by the word friendship, that some people are made to be together in every possible way, and that sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is admit that what you always had was exactly what you always wanted. The following 2 months were like living in a dream. Ethan and Stella navigated the transition from best friendship to romance with an ease that surprised them both. There wasn't the awkward adjustment period they had feared. Instead, it was as if they had finally found the complete version of themselves. They kept all the things that made their friendship special. The inside jokes, the wordless communication, the absolute comfort in each other's presence. But now there were additional layers of intimacy that made each day feel like a discovery. Ethan discovered that Stella made small, happy sounds when he played with her hair. Stella discovered that Ethan had a crescent moon-shaped birthmark on his right shoulder that she had never noticed in all the years she'd known him. The people of Willowbrook reacted to the change with a mixture of, "It's about time and I always knew it." Ethan's mother was radiant, while Stella's mother was moved to tears, saying she had been praying for this for years. It was as if the entire town had been waiting for them to realize what everyone else already saw. But it was exactly this universal acceptance that planted the first seed of doubt in Stella's mind. "Do you think we're doing this because it's what everyone expects?" she asked one morning, while they were having coffee in Ethan's kitchen. It was raining outside, and they had spent the morning reading on the couch. Stella nestled against his chest, as if she had been born to be there. Ethan looked at her over his coffee cup. "Are you doing this because of what others expect?" "No." Stella replied quickly. "No, I feel all of this genuinely. But sometimes I wonder if part of the ease is because we've always been Ethan and Stella to everyone. Like we're just filling a role that was already written for us, and that would be bad?" Stella frowned, trying to articulate the discomfort that had been growing in her mind. "Not bad, exactly. But I want to make sure we're together because we chose to be, not because it's what was always expected of us." Ethan put his cup on the table and turned to face her completely. "Stella, do you think I'm with you out of obligation? Social expectation?" No, of course not." She shook her head, frustrated with herself for not being able to adequately explain what she was feeling. "It's just that sometimes I wonder if we know other versions of ourselves, if we know who we are independently of each other." The conversation could have ended there, with Ethan reassuring her and them moving forward. But 2 weeks later, Stella received a call that changed everything. "Stella, this is Daniel from Hartwell & Associates Publishing in Boston." Stella almost dropped the phone. Hartwell & Associates was one of the most respected independent publishers on the East Coast, known for publishing quality literary fiction. She had sent them a manuscript months ago, a novel she had written during the lonely nights after Ethan's return. When she was trying to process her confused feelings, "We read your manuscript," Daniel continued, "and we're very interested. We'd like to discuss not only publishing this book, but also the possibility of a 3-book contract. Would it be possible for you to come to Boston for a meeting next week?" Stella sat heavily in the chair behind the bookstore counter, her heart beating so loud she was sure Daniel could hear it through the phone. Yes, of course. Excellent. And Stella, just so you know, there's also the possibility of an editorial position here, if that would interest you. We know you have experience managing a bookstore, and we're looking for someone with your profile to lead our new contemporary fiction division." When Stella hung up the phone, her hands were shaking. It was everything she had dreamed of. Recognition for her writing, the chance to work in the publishing world, the opportunity for a career she had only dared to imagine. But it meant leaving Willowbrook. It meant leaving the family bookstore. It meant leaving Ethan. She didn't tell him immediately. Instead, she spent 3 torturous days trying to process the offer, researching the publisher, imagining what her life would be like in Boston. The city was only 3 hours away. It wasn't like she was moving to another continent, but it also wasn't Willowbrook, where her entire life was intertwined with Ethan's in ways that went far beyond romance. When she finally gathered the courage to tell him, they were making dinner together in her kitchen, a ritual they had developed over the past few weeks. Ethan was chopping vegetables, while Stella stirred the sauce, and there was something so domestic and perfect about the moment that she almost lost her nerve. "Ethan," she said finally, "I need to tell you something." Something in her tone made him stop chopping and look at her. "Okay, remember the manuscript I wrote? The novel about discovering you're in love with your best friend?" Ethan smiled. "How could I forget? You spent months writing in secret and then blushed every time I asked what you were working on. Well, a publisher in Boston wants to publish it, and they offered a 3-book contract and an editorial position." The smile slowly disappeared from Ethan's face. In Boston, he put the knife down on the cutting board, his movements deliberately controlled. That's incredible, Stella. It's everything you've always wanted. It is. But you don't look happy." Stella turned off the heat under the sauce and turned to face him. "I am happy. I'm terrified and euphoric, and completely lost all at the same time. Because of me." It wasn't a question. Ethan knew her too well not to understand exactly what her dilemma was. "Because of us," Stella corrected. "Ethan, I don't know how to do this. How to choose between the life I've always dreamed of and the life I just discovered I want." Ethan moved closer to her, taking her hands. "It's not a choice, Stella. It shouldn't be. But it is, isn't it? How can we make a relationship work with 3 hours between us, especially when we're still figuring out what we are? People make long-distance relationships work all the time. People who had time to build a solid foundation first. We've been together for 2 months, Ethan. 2 months. And before that, we spent weeks fighting about our feelings. Ethan dropped her hands and stepped away, running his hands through his hair. A gesture Stella recognized as a sign that he was deeply disturbed. So, what are you saying? The 2 months isn't enough to be worth fighting for. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying I don't know if we're strong enough yet to survive the distance and all the changes that would come with it. And I'm saying maybe the only way to find out is by trying. They stared at each other across the kitchen, and Stella felt like she could see the exact moment when anger and frustration replaced understanding in his eyes. You've already decided, haven't you? Ethan asked, his voice colder than she had ever heard it. You've already decided to go. I don't know. That's why I'm talking to you about it. No, Stella. You're telling me about your decision. There's a difference. His words hit her like a slap. That's not fair. Not fair? You know what's not fair? Finding out that the person you love is willing to throw away what you have at the first opportunity for something better. I'm not throwing it away. And it's not about something better. It's about who I am beyond us. It's about having an identity that isn't completely intertwined with our history. Ethan laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Our history. You talk about it like it's something that binds you instead of something that frees you. Sometimes I feel like it does bind me. The admission came out louder than Stella intended, and she immediately regretted it when she saw the pain in his eyes. Ethan, I didn't mean. You did mean it. And you know what? Maybe you're right. Maybe we're idiots for thinking we could turn a childhood friendship into something adult and lasting. Don't say that. Why not? You clearly believe it. Stella felt tears burning in her eyes. I don't believe that. I believe in us. But I also believe that if we're not able to grow as individuals, we won't have anything real to offer each other. And you can't grow here with the man who loves you. The question hung between them, loaded with years of history and months of newly formed dreams. Stella wanted to say yes, wanted to run into his arms, and promise that Willowbrook and he were all she needed. But a part of her, the part that had written the novel in the silent hours of dawn, the part that had dreamed of a bigger life, knew it wouldn't be true. Maybe, she said finally, but I don't know if I'll get this chance again. Ethan nodded slowly, as if his worst suspicions had been confirmed. Then you have to go, Stella. Ethan, no, you have to go because if you don't, you'll always wonder. And I'll always know I wasn't enough to make you stay. It's not about you not being enough. It's about me needing to know who I am when I'm not part of Ethan and Stella. And what if you find out you like that version of yourself better? It was the question Stella was most afraid to answer because she wasn't sure of the answer. I don't know. Ethan nodded again, and when he looked at her, there was a resignation in his eyes that broke her heart. Then I guess we have our answer. That night, for the first time in weeks, they slept apart. Stella went home to her own bed and lay awake until dawn, wondering if she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Across town, Ethan did the same thing. 3 months had passed since Stella left for Boston, and they were the longest months Ethan had ever lived through. The town seemed smaller without her, the colors more pale, as if Stella had taken with her some essential vitality he didn't know existed until it disappeared. They had tried to keep in touch at first, polite text messages about how they were adapting to their new lives, occasional phone calls that were more uncomfortable than comforting. But gradually, communication had dwindled to almost nothing, not out of anger, but because each conversation was a painful reminder of what they had lost. Ethan had thrown himself into work, accepting extra projects at the insurance agency, and even considering a friend's offer to become a partner in a consulting firm in Richmond, anything to keep his mind busy, to not think about Stella's empty apartment above the bookstore, the afternoons they used to spend together, the way she fit perfectly in his arms. But at the end of October, when Willowbrook's leaves were at their golden and red peak, Ethan received a call from Stella's mother. Ethan, dear, can you come here? There's something I need to show you. He found Mrs. Morgan at the bookstore, which had remained closed since Stella left. There was a stack of letters on the table, and Ethan immediately recognized the familiar handwriting. She writes to me every week, Mrs. Morgan said softly, and every week, half the letter is about you. Ethan picked up one of the letters, his hands trembling slightly. The date was from 2 weeks ago. Mom, Boston is everything I thought it would be. The work is challenging and exciting, and I'm learning so much. My editor says the second book is shaping up nicely. I should be happy, and I am most of the time. But there are moments when I see something funny on the street, or when I find a cafe that Ethan would love, or when I wake up in the middle of the night afraid of storms, when I feel like a part of me is missing. I told him I needed to figure out who I was without him. But the truth is, I've discovered I'm a less complete version of myself when he's not here. She miserable, Mrs. Morgan said gently, too proud to admit it, too scared to come back. And you? Ethan placed the letter back on the table. Miserable too. So, what are you two going to do about it? Before Ethan could answer, his phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize, but there was something familiar about the voice when he answered. Ethan, this is Daniel from Hartwell and Associates Publishing. Stella gave me your number. Listen, I know this might seem strange, but could you come to Boston? There's a situation with Stella, and I think you need to be here. Ethan's heart sank. Is she okay? Is she hurt? She's physically fine, but, well, it's complicated. Can you come? Ethan looked at Mrs. Morgan, who was watching his expression with concern. I can be there in 3 hours. The drive to Boston was the longest of Ethan's life. His mind raced through every possible scenario. Stella sick, Stella in danger, Stella. He couldn't even finish some of the thoughts. Daniel had given only the address of an apartment in Back Bay, and the promise that everything would make sense when he arrived. The apartment was in an elegant brownstone building, the kind of place Ethan had always imagined Stella would end up living. When he rang the bell, it was Daniel who answered, a middle-aged man with graying hair and a kind smile that didn't completely disguise his concern. Ethan, thank you for coming. She doesn't know you're here. Where is she? Upstairs in her apartment. Listen, before you go up, I need to explain some things. Daniel gestured for Ethan to sit in the elegant lobby. Stella is a talented writer, exceptionally talented. Her first book is being very well received by early critics, and the second promises to be even better. But she's not writing. 2 weeks ago, she just stopped. Can't finish a sentence, says she's lost her voice, that the words don't come anymore. Ethan frowned. That doesn't sound like Stella. She always wrote, even when she was blocked. Exactly. And when I asked what changed, she started crying, said she sacrificed the most important thing in her life for her career, and now she can't even remember why she thought it was a good idea. The words hit Ethan like a punch to the stomach. She said that? She did, and much more, about how she thought she needed to prove she could be someone without you, but discovered that all her best stories, all her most authentic characters, are based on the life you built together. Danielle paused. She's in crisis, Ethan. And I think you're the only person who can help her out of it. Ethan climbed the stairs with his heart pounding. Stella's apartment was on the 3rd floor, and when he reached the door, he could hear music playing softly inside, a playlist he recognized, full of songs they used to listen to together. He knocked gently on the door. Daniel, I told you I don't want to see anyone today. Stella's voice came from inside, muffled and tired. It's not Daniel, Ethan said. There was a long silence, followed by the sound of footsteps approaching quickly. When the door opened, Ethan felt like someone had punched all the air out of his lungs. Stella stood in the doorway, wearing an old t-shirt he recognized as his. Her hair pulled back in a messy bun, her eyes red from crying. She looked smaller, more fragile, as if the last few months had stolen something essential from her. Ethan, she whispered, as if she couldn't believe he was really there. Hi, Stella. They stared at each other for a moment that seemed to stretch forever. Ethan could see the struggle happening in her eyes. Surprise, relief, fear, hope, love, all mixing in an expression that broke and mended his heart simultaneously. What are you doing here? She finally asked. Daniel called me. Said you needed me. Stella closed her eyes, a single tear rolling down her cheek. I always need you. That's the problem. Why would that be a problem? Because I came here to prove I could be independent, to prove I could have a life without you, and all I discovered is that I don't want a life without you. Ethan took a step closer, and Stella didn't back away. Stella, I made a mistake, she said, the words coming out in a rush. A terrible mistake. I thought I had to choose between you and my dreams, but I discovered that my dreams don't mean anything if I can't share them with you. You didn't make a mistake. You did what you needed to do. No. Stella shook her head violently. I did what I thought I should do. There's a difference. I thought I had to prove something to myself, to you, to the world, but the only thing I proved is that I'm completely miserable without you. Ethan raised his hand to touch her face, and Stella leaned into the touch like a flower leaning toward the sun. You're not miserable. You're building an incredible career. You're achieving your dreams. I'm living nightmares, Stella said. more tears streaming down her face. I wake up every morning in a beautiful apartment, in a wonderful city, with a job that should make me happy. And all I feel is emptiness. Because you're not there to share breakfast with me. Because when something funny happens, you're not there to laugh with me. Because when I'm scared during storms, you're not there to hold me. Stella, I love you, she said, the words coming out like a desperate confession. I love you in every possible way, and trying to live without that, trying to pretend I can be complete alone, is killing me. Ethan pulled her into his arms then, and Stella collapsed against him, as if all the defenses she had built over the last few months finally crumbled. She cried against his chest, years of repressed love and months of loneliness finally finding expression. I love you too, he whispered against her hair. I never stopped, not for a second. They stood there in the doorway, holding each other like they were anchors in a storm. And maybe they were. Maybe they had always been each other's anchors, and trying to navigate alone had been the mistake from the beginning. What do we do now? Stella asked when she finally managed to stop crying. Now we stop pretending we can live without what we have, Ethan said. Now we figure out how to make this work. But Boston, my job. We'll figure it out together, like we should have from the beginning. Stella lifted her head to look at him, and for the first time in months, there was real hope in her eyes. Would you come to Boston? I would go anywhere, as long as it's with you. When they kissed there in the doorway, there were no more doubts, no more fear of ruining what they had. There was only the absolute certainty that they belonged to each other in every possible way, regardless of where they were. Because sometimes discovering who you are without someone only serves to confirm that you are infinitely better with them. And sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is admit that you don't want to be independent when being interdependent is so much richer, fuller, truer. That night, when they made love for the first time, it was with the urgency of people who had almost lost everything, and the tenderness of people who finally understood they would never again have to choose between love and dreams, because the best dreams, they discovered, were the ones that included the person you loved by your side, to share them. 6 months later, Stella was standing at the window of her new office in Boston, watching the city's movement below, but it wasn't the urban view that made her smile. It was the reflection in the window. Ethan sitting at her desk, typing on his laptop, completely absorbed in the project he was working on. He had moved to Boston 2 weeks after that unforgettable night when they reunited. It wasn't an impulsive decision, but rather the result of long conversations about how to build a life together that honored both love and individual ambitions. Ethan had accepted the offer to become a partner in the consulting firm, but with the condition of working remotely from Boston, visiting Richmond only when necessary. You're watching me again, Ethan said without looking up from the screen. How do you know? Because after 25 years, I know when you're watching me. Plus, I can see your reflection on my screen. Stella laughed, moving closer to him. I was thinking about how strange it is that everything has fallen into place so perfectly. I mean, statistically, the chances of... Stella, Ethan spun his chair to face her, pulling her onto his lap. Stop overanalyzing our happiness. I'm not overanalyzing. I'm appreciating the complexity of it. It was true. The last 6 months had been a revelation of how mature love could be simultaneously simple and deeply complex. They had discovered that knowing someone your whole life didn't mean there was nothing left to discover. In fact, it meant there were infinite layers to explore. Stella had returned to writing with renewed passion. Her second book, inspired by her journey of almost losing and then finding Ethan again, was being acclaimed as a masterpiece of contemporary fiction, but more important than critical success was how the words flowed again, how every story she told was infused with the completeness she had found. How was the meeting with the editor today? Ethan asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her arm. Good. They want me to consider a lecture tour this summer, universities mainly, talking about how to transform personal experiences into universal fiction, and I said yes, as long as you can come with me. Ethan smiled. To carry your bags? To be my anchor. To remind me who I am when I'm being Stella Morgan, the writer, instead of just Stella. It was something they had learned to navigate. How to maintain their individual identities, while honoring the unity they had built. Stella was more confident in her professional aspirations when she knew Ethan was there to support her. Ethan discovered he was more creative and ambitious when he had Stella to share his ideas with and celebrate his victories. Speaking of anchors, Ethan said, my parents called today. They want to know if we're going to Willowbrook this weekend for the spring festival. Of course, I was missing the town. It was true. Boston had become home, but Willowbrook would always be where their roots were planted. They returned regularly, keeping the apartment above the bookstore, which Stella's mother had transformed into an extension of the business, offering writing workshops and reading groups. It was comforting to know they would always have a place to return to, a shared history that awaited them. Actually, Ethan continued, there's something I wanted to ask you about this weekend. Something in his tone made Stella look at him more carefully. What is it? Remember the old house in Connecticut? The one where we finally kissed for the first time? How could I forget? Your mom told me that you decided not to sell it after all, that she wants to keep it in the family. Yes, she said there were too many good memories there, and some transformative ones. Stella smiled, remembering that stormy night that had changed everything. Well, I was thinking maybe we could stop by there on our way to Willowbrook. There's something I'd like to show you. There was something in the way he said it, cautious, nervous, hopeful, that made Stella's heart race. Ethan, it's a surprise. A good one, I hope. That Friday, they drove to Connecticut under a clear blue sky that promised a perfect weekend. The house looked exactly as Stella remembered. Majestic and welcoming, surrounded by trees that were beginning to show the first green signs of spring. Why are we here exactly? Stella asked as they got out of the car. Just trust me, okay? Ethan seemed more nervous than she had seen him in years. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the front door, and he kept checking his jacket pocket, as if confirming something was still there. Ethan, you're making me nervous. Sorry, it's important. They entered the house, and Stella was immediately transported back to that night. The storm, the fear, the discovery that love sometimes comes not as lightning, but as a gradual awakening to something that was always there. Come on, Ethan said, leading her up the stairs to the master bedroom. The room was exactly as they remembered, except for one difference. There were candles lit everywhere, creating a soft golden light that made everything magical. Ethan, Stella whispered, turning to face him, but when she turned around, Ethan was no longer standing. He was kneeling on the floor, a small velvet box in his hands, his eyes shining with unshed tears. Stella, he began, his voice trembling slightly. In this bed, in this room, almost a year ago, we finally stopped pretending we were just friends. And since then, every day has been a discovery of how deep love can be, how transformative it can be, how it can be simultaneously the most natural thing in the world and the most extraordinary. Stella felt her own tears beginning to form. Ethan, let me finish, he said with a tremulous smile. I met you when I was 6 years old, and since then you've been my constant, my best friend, my confidant, my anchor, my home. And now you're my love, my partner, my inspiration. You are everything. He opened the box, revealing a simple but stunning ring, an emerald surrounded by small diamonds, the exact shade of Stella's eyes. Stella Morgan, Ethan said, his voice now steady with conviction. Will you marry me? Not because it's what was always expected of us, not because it's the logical next step, but because I can't imagine a single version of my future where you're not by my side as my wife. Stella couldn't speak. Tears were flowing freely down her face now, and she was sure her heart was going to explode from so much happiness. Finally, she managed to nod, and then found her voice. Yes, she whispered. Yes, of course, yes. Ethan stood up, sliding the ring onto her finger with hands that trembled with emotion and relief. When they kissed, it was with all the passion of new lovers and all the depth of a lifetime of mutual knowledge. I love you, Stella said against his lips. I love you as my best friend, as my lover, as my future husband. I love you in ways I didn't even know existed. I love you too. Forever. They spent the night in that bed where it all began, making plans for the future, laughing about the past, marveling at the journey that had brought them here. Outside, there was no storm this time, just the perfect quiet of two people who finally knew, without a shadow of doubt, that they belonged to each other. 6 months later, they were married in Willowbrook, in the same church where they had been baptized as children. Stella wore her grandmother's dress, and Ethan cried when he saw her walking down the aisle. The entire town attended because Ethan and Stella weren't just a couple getting married. They were the love story everyone had witnessed grow and bloom over decades. During the reception, as they danced their first dance as husband and wife, Stella looked into Ethan's eyes and saw not just the man she loved, but the boy she had met 25 years ago, the teenager who had been her confidant, the young adult she had almost lost. and the man who had chosen to build a life with her. "So," she said, smiling as he spun her around, "how do you think our story will end?" "It won't end," Ethan replied, pulling her closer, "because the best love stories don't have endings. They just keep developing, chapter after chapter, year after year." And he was right, because when you find the person who is simultaneously your history and your future, your past and your possibility, the ending becomes just the beginning, and their beginning together was infinite. Sometimes the deepest love grows silently beside us, disguised as friendship, waiting patiently until we're ready to recognize it. Ethan and Stella discovered they didn't need to choose between security and passion. They could have both, because true love isn't about finding someone perfect, but about finding someone who makes you a more complete version of yourself. And perhaps, deep down, we all have someone like that in our lives, someone who knows our history, who has seen our growth, who chooses to love us, not despite our flaws, but including all of them. The question that remains is, are you paying enough attention to recognize when true love is right in front of you?